I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Al Orlando. I am an application specialist at Infinite Campus. I did start as a trainer, which is why I was asked to do this session for everyone. And for about the next 30-ish minutes, I'm going to take you through some of the different slides and the functionality that we're going to be releasing, not only in the 2028 release, which happened, I think, last week or semi-recently, but also in the 2032 release, which is going to add in some additional functionality into our blended learning. So one of the components of our blended learning is we needed to come up with a way to have flexible scheduling. And I saw that there were some questions in, I think it's Soapbox, if that's right. There was a couple of questions in regards to scheduling, which is great. I'll be able to address a couple of those. But it is building out schedules that are going to adhere to things like social distance practices, hybrid models for learning, and then being able to effectively schedule and track for participation. One of the things that we are encouraging before I go any further, and I'll mention this a couple of times, if any of you have watched the training that Eric Gordy, our training department, as well as Stephen Hallman recorded and posted last week, you'll hear them mention several times that you need to do your scheduling like normal. Schedule for the next school year like you normally would. Don't do anything different, because the tools that we're going to introduce for blended learning work off of your existing schedules for next year. So there isn't anything, special that you need to do or changes that you would need to make unless you're going to already do those. So make sure that you have your schedules built out, because this tooling kind of overlays on top of your existing schedules. Okay, so here is basically a normal classroom, we'll call it. This would be, next year, if everyone's 100% back on site, you're going to have a classroom full of students that are all sitting in front of you. Well, the reality is for the next school year, there's going to be some students that in this kind of hybrid blended learning model, they're going to need to be present every single day. You'll have students that maybe their parents are first responders, or for whatever reason, maybe they need hot meals at school. They're going to be in school 100% of the time, or as much as possible. There's also going to be the flip side of that. There are students that this upcoming school year, maybe they have compromised immune system, pre-existing conditions, maybe they are sick with COVID-19. They're going to need to be virtual every single day. They're not going to be coming into school. And then in between there, something that we're seeing with a lot of our end users, not just in Kentucky, but actually nationwide, is some type of rotation for the rest of those students. Some students are going to be present, let's say Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then they're going to be virtual on the following day. So some type of flip-flop, kind of like a rotation, like we would normally think, with our period schedules, but now rotating students that are going to be virtual on some days, present on other days. And then that is mixed in with students that need to be present every day or virtual every day. So we built out some tools in the 2028 release that will allow you to do this by creating different groups. Okay, so it is something that will help you mark the student participation, because if you need to eventually add in participation, or you can think of it as attendance too, really is what it's marking, you'll need a way to distinguish which students are virtual, which students are on site. So this helps you to do that. I keep clicking my arrows on my keyboard and not hitting the arrows on the screen here for the next slide. There also needs to be a way for either teachers or students to submit that participation, which I'll show you some examples of. Almost did it again. And then whether or not that's going to tie into state reporting. Now, I get the pleasure of talking to one state right now, but every state is still determining how they're going to track and mark attendance for the upcoming school years. Not a lot of them have figured it out if they're going to use, last year's ADA. So that question's still kind of up in the air. I won't be able to answer any questions about that. So if you have those, I'll let somebody else address that. All right, so let's take a look at some of the pieces of this blended learning. So a new tool that you're going to get in the scheduling module is going to allow you to create these blended learning groups. And hopefully this is big enough for everyone to see. But on the left-hand side, you'll see the names of my groups. I have one that's always virtual. Those are the students that I know are not coming into school for whatever reason. They're always going to be 100% at home. Then I have some different groups, red, blue, green, and yellow. In the middle column there, some of you might notice that those colors don't actually correspond with the name colors. The initial release will not allow you to change the group color. However, in the upcoming release, you will be able to change the group color. So I named those groups before I realized that I couldn't change the group color. That was my mistake. But like I said, in an upcoming release, you will be able to edit or change those group colors, very similarly to how you can do that now with flags. You're familiar with that. And then on the very far right-hand side, you'll notice that there's a column called Students Added. There is a manual option as well as an automatic option. Now, I'm not going to go over the whole step-by-step of that because that's already been done in that training. But basically what you can do is either build things out manually, and we encourage you to do that first. It's very similar if you build out schedules and you do things like maybe you're going to place your special ed students and lock them into your master schedule. It's similar with this tool where if you know that certain students are going to be virtual or certain students are going to be at home, build out those manual groups first so that when you create the other ones, which use the automated algorithm, you can allow that to sort of work around those manually placed students, again, very similarly to what you would do inside of scheduling. So that algorithm will place all of your students into a group, right? So that will place them into their blended schedule group. It also will tie into their participation. And that is what's going to choose whether they are virtual or whether they are at home, depending on what group they're in. It has a lot of logic built into it. So the group will be built off of a couple of key things. Number one, it builds off of your existing schedule, which is why it's so important to have your scheduling process like you normally would, so that the algorithm for the blended learning groups knows how to balance out all of those groups, because this is a district-wide tool. It looks at the section level to make sure that inside of each of your sections, all of these different groups will be equally represented from section to section. That way, when you do have some students on site, some students at home, there's not going to be a bunch of mismatches at the classroom level so that teachers will have 30 students one day and 2 students the next day. They'll try to make sure that to the section level that they get balanced out. The next key important thing that the blended learning groups will look at is the primary household for those students. I'm sure you have many, many families at your districts like mine. I have 2 older brothers, made for a wonderful childhood, and all of us are equally enough apart that we were always in different schools. So I was in elementary, my brother Mike was always in middle school, and then my oldest brother was in high school. What this tool wants to be able to do is if a family has multiple students across the district, we want to make sure that they get into the same blended learning group so that there isn't a mismatch at home where maybe I'm the elementary student and I am, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then my brothers are on site Thursday and Friday. As much as I would have personally loved that, I would actually be able to change the channel on the TV and play a video game for once. That's not going to work out with parents and them going to work and them being at home and making sure that that has been fixed. So this tool will be looking at the primary household to make sure that siblings, people that are part of a household, are part of the same blended learning group. A couple of questions that have been asked. Again, if you've watched the training, you probably heard these. These are common sort of QA things that we've encountered. What happens if there's multiple households? Again, it will look at the primary. What happens if there's multiple primary households for the student? It's sort of a semantic thing, but some districts will choose to not use the word secondary. I don't know how common that is in Kentucky, but you can have a student with 2 primary households. If it gets down to that level, one of the developers had a really good explanation of it, but basically what it will do is it looks at which primary household either has the oldest student. So maybe one has a 12th grader and the other primary household only has a 6th grader. It's going to work off of that 12th grader. All things being equal, it will work off of whatever primary household has the highest household ID, because it's got to work off of something. So I think all things being equal, it'll go to that. I could be wrong. It could have changed. So if there's a correction for that, again, I'm sorry. I'm trying to do my best at remembering my training skills from years prior, but that is what I know for now. Okay, let me look at my agenda. I want to make sure I didn't forget anything here. That's good. Okay. Now, moving on. So my next slide here, this is the assignment tool. So when you're building out those groups, there's a tool for building them, and then there's a tool for adjusting the groups here. So it's a nice workflow, very similar to a lot of the other workflows that we have developed, things like custom forms, some of the other tools. I think the new grading window works similarly to this, where it will take you from start to finish. You can see that progress along the top of the screen, so you know where you started and you know exactly where you are in that process, which for me, someone that's visual is always very helpful. You'll have your students listed there. These can be built out by an individual school or multiple schools at the same time. And one important thing is students can only be a part of one blended learning group. So if something happens where, a student is part of, let's say, my red group, I'll come back one slide here. Again, I keep hitting the arrows on my computer. Let's say that a student is part of the red group and they get sick, or for whatever reason, they need to change groups. There is a way on the student's attendance tab, so student information general attendance tab, there is going to be a tool that will allow you to change an individual student's blended learning group, but they'll only be a part of one. I don't know if that's going to change in the future, but that is what I've been told so far. So this is a way that you can do it in mass using those tools, or like I said, the assignments will also be available on the student's attendance tab. There'll be a nice little button there to go in and be able to manually do that for just one student. Okay, then the tool that allows you to build the groups, edit the groups, is the same tool that helps you determine what day of the week these different blended learning groups will either be on site or virtual. So it does link up with the days tab. So student or system admin calendar on the days tab, which I have a screenshot here. This is where you see, the actual traditional calendar, the actual days of the week. If we see here, I've clicked on an individual day, the 21st of July. I have my period schedule, I have attendance, all of those types of things. This tool will work off of days that are checked for attendance. So that's sort of the linkage piece with the days tab. It will assign blended learning groups on days in the calendar that are checked for attendance. And depending on how you build out that rotation, 5-day, 4-day, whatever it needs to be, you can have one or more blended learning groups on a particular calendar day. So we can see here that my red students are going to be virtual on the 21st. So it's not a two-step process. It's really nice. It does all of that in the same thing here. Again, I'm going to just move back one slide. So as I'm building out my groups, I will also have the ability to then assign those groups to days in my calendar. There are some nice tips and tricks that are talked about at the very end of that training by the process consultant, Stephen Hallman, to get around things like holidays and in-service days that, depending on how you want to build your rotation, that can kind of cause a little wrench in the algorithm there, but they've got some nice workarounds for that. So if you're in charge of actually assigning these, I encourage you to re-listen to that because Stephen does a good job of really explaining that in depth. And then if I move on here, there aren't any canned reports. We took a lot of our in-progress development and we shifted it toward this blended learning effort. We're pretty proud of the fact that, to our knowledge, we're the only SIS in the marketplace that's really doing this right now. A lot of the other ones have sort of posted language about it, and they've sort of talked about it in some of their forums, but we're the only ones that have actually gone and put this into development. And because we made such a big effort in the functionality, they didn't create any canned reports. But what they did do is they added in several new tables and several new columns into the ad hoc trees so that you can go in and start to make some reports of your own. So one I have here, this is actually using the data analysis tool, something we updated recently. Great tool, lots of good functionality. And if you're familiar with it, you'll know that it's had a nice little update and some added feature functionality there. This is basically a data analysis where I went in and I pulled all of my students by grade level so I can see not only a distribution of how many students are in each of those groups, but because I'm using this in data analysis, I don't just get the raw data, I can also start to put that into some of those pivots so that I can see a little bit more visually a breakdown of, who's here out of my 8th graders, which students are present, which students are virtual, what's the distribution of my 9th graders, what's the distribution between always present or always virtual compared to the rest of my students. I have another example here where I have put it into a nice little bar chart. Same data, but just looking at it from a different way. So you can build some of these out. You can also build out just normal ad hocs, data viewers, and either keep those for yourself, or if this is something that you want to share with your district people, of course, you know that you can always share them using groups, or you can put them into, the attendance module or wherever you would like as a custom outline link from a district level so that people can have access to them that way. Then we get into the blended learning attendance or participation. The verbiage of that, my slide here might be off. I don't quite remember if we're going to actually call this attendance or participation, but for today, we're going to call it participation. This is what's going to come out in 2032. If I look at my, 2032, which is the next release in August. And this is going to then allow you to mark participation for those students that are virtual. So this is going to be done a couple of different ways. This slide's a little blurry, it's just a little small, but first of all, there is enable that virtual participation, right? So allow students or teachers to mark if a student is virtual that day, how they're going to be participating, how they're going to interact with something like attendance. For the student participation, that's that first option there, that kind of first cluster of checkboxes and options. You can allow teachers to mark participation for students. And then you'll notice that there is a little day counter there. So a teacher can actually go back to previous days or into the future. That's something that will be new. Normally, teachers can only take attendance for the day that they are on, but with this virtual participation, we're going to allow at the district level to set how many days a teacher can go back and edit that virtual participation. You can also have students mark their own participation. You'll notice that that's a checkbox because they can do both. You can have the students mark it and maybe have the teachers mark it if you want them to have the final say and maybe override something. And then if the students have the ability to mark their own participation, there's many subsequent questions and options for them. Is this just like a once a day type of thing? Maybe you only need students to check in one time a day and they get full membership, they get full participation for that day. We call that California attendance. There's another option here where you can allow the students to check in once per course, or they can check in during the actual start and end times of the periods. This can be very useful if you do have this blended type of rotation where some students are actually in class during the normal class time. And if you use that option, the students would be required to be on their portal, checking in at the same times that their classmates are in that physical classroom based off of your normal start and end times for the periods. Or that very last option there at the bottom, you can just set a time that students are required to check in. Maybe it's at noon or it's at, you want to do a start end time. That way you can make it a little bit more flexible rather than your period start and end times. Okay. And then below that box, there's just a couple of additional things here, like what is the frequency for posting virtual attendance? So posting that information, that data, and also a range and an attendance code. But some of that will be dependent on some state options. So I'm kind of going to skip over that. So this is what's going to be coming in the next release, is the ability to do that. Now, what does it look like from our teacher and from our student perspective? That is the next thing that I will show. So this is what a teacher is going to see if they're in maybe their control center, maybe they're looking at it from their phone. What they will be able to see is all of their students, and you'll notice in the top left-hand corner, right underneath the course name, is the option to flip back and forth between students that are in class, and then the next option to the right, which is students that are virtual. So this is what links up with that rotation. That's how the blended learning groups will map up with your participation, because those two things are going to have a nice little relationship back and forth. And the in-class students, that's just normal attendance, present, absent, tardy, office marks them, the office still wins with attendance inside of the in-class area. But then on the virtual, depending on how you have that set up, you can either see if a student has checked in, which is that first column, gives that kind of almost like a turquoise color there with that check mark, and then that right column, which is a check box for the teacher to input their participation. Okay, so that's dependent on how you have that set up. Same type of comment options from the left to the right. Teachers will always be able to put in comments, and who can see those comments is dependent on your district preferences. Other views that they might want to see this if they have attendance by their seating chart. Hopefully it's not blocking it, but if you look towards the bottom, you'll see that some students have that virtual next to their name. That is showing in something like a seating chart, students that are in class or students that are virtual. If you have attendance selected, so if the teacher is taking attendance by seating chart, it's the normal attendance, present, absent, tardy for the students that are in class, and then those same options for the virtual students where there's a checkbox for student marked or teacher marked. And then lastly, looking at it from the student perspective, now in the student portal, so the campus student portal, there's going to be some new options, some additional things that are going to show up for them. There's going to be a new tool in their index called attendance check-in. There's also going to be a new area added into the today screen, so that actual landing page for the students where they see their schedule, their food service balance, assignments due today, assignments due tomorrow. There's going to be something added there for attendance or participation check-in. So they'll be able to see the class. Are you here? Marked as present, click yes, or whatever those settings are, but the students will be able to do it through their portal. They can do that from their phone. They can do that from their computer. As long as they have their portal, they have a mobile device or a computer, and they can get logged in, they're going to be able to mark that participation. And I think that's my last slide. One other thing that I didn't get a screenshot of, so I'm going to move back a few slides here, is we saw from the student, we saw from the teacher, but what about just the normal staff member? What about someone in the office or a principal? How are they going to know if a student is in class or virtual? Well, what's going to happen is when you create these blended learning groups, not only does it have functionality to build the group, assign the day, link it up with the virtual participation, but it will also create flags, normal flags that you see up in a student header that are going to correspond to their group. So they'll automatically have a flag created. That flag will show up on the student. So it'll be very easy when you look up a student, you go to, student information general, or you're in the health tab or wherever, and you have a student pulled up in Infinite Campus, there will be a new flag right to the up in their header where you'll be able to see, are they virtual or are they in class today? So you'll be able to see it that way. There's also going to be some notifications that are going to be automated, again, from their blended learning group, to notify students and parents when they are supposed to be in class or when they are supposed to be virtual. So kind of setting up like a reminder through their portal or through their notifications. when they're supposed to be in class or when they're supposed to be virtual. So we're trying to make this as flexible as possible. Keep in mind that the 2028 is the initial release. So it doesn't have everything that we have planned, but it has enough for you to get started. It has enough for you to build out the groups, which is sort of the main piece of this, is being able to do that. But in the future releases leading closer and closer to the start of school and after the start of school, I think there's going to be a couple more pieces of functionality added. So for sure, the 2032, and then I think there's one more release after that where they're going to add in some more functionality. All right, that is all that I had. I'll quickly float through those slides again, make sure that I didn't forget anything. I did not. Questions, comments, anything like that? Let me pull up the questions here. All right. So a few questions actually started at the very beginning. So I've got 3 minutes. So let me try to roll through these and give answers to ones that I can answer. So I think the first question that I see here was something about blended learning groups, and I see my district is either doing 100% in person or 100% online. Do I need to use this for blended learning? I think what the training department would recommend is if you are doing 100% on site, so all students come back to school, then it's a normal schedule and you wouldn't really need to use these tools, I think. But if they are all virtual, then yes, you would need to use this. You would only have to create one group, which is all virtual, but they would still recommend it to do that. A trainer might tell you differently, so definitely go off of what they say, not off of what I say, but that's how I see it here. Another question, scrolling a little bit further down. Okay. Trying to find some. If anyone has one that I haven't read yet, don't be.
Al, this is Dee Dee. Let me try to read some to you. I'll help. Yeah, there's a request for some clarity. Do you, let's see. There was need of clarity. Do you have also have to have rotations built into your calendar period setup to use with blended learning if students won't attend daily, or does this work around that?
Great question. No, you do not. If you just have one period schedule, you don't have, block scheduling or any of that kind of stuff. You just have one period schedule. That is fine. The rotation for blended learning is separate than the rotation for your periods and your traditional schedule, I'll call it.
Okay, could you repeat the two things that blended learning tool looks at if you have two primary households?
Yep. So when I watch the recording, this is how the developer explained it. It will look at first which primary household has the oldest age students. So the example that he gave was one primary household, the oldest student is in 5th grade, and the next primary household, the student is in 12th grade. It will use the household with the 12th grader because it has a student with the oldest age. If both of them are the same, then it will look at whatever household ID, so sort of the internal database household ID, is higher.
Okay, thank you. Here's one. I'm kind of missing some that I think are probably KDE questions, so I'm jumping over those. We would like to put students in 8 different courses and offer a rotating block schedule where students will go to 4 classes one week and 4 classes the second week. I guess the question is, does that work well with this, or it might be a question that goes beyond this conversation?
Yeah, that's kind of just a normal scheduling question, because if that's the schedule rotation that they want to do, that's fine. They can certainly do that. And then when they create their blended learning groups, it will just follow that kind of 2-week rotation that they're doing. That 8-course rotation will just try to balance that out.
Okay. So is there anything that will alert clerks to put them in a group when a new student enrolls? If not, and the clerk forgets, will it create a schedule gap?
Oh, very good question. I don't know the answer to that one. That would have to go to the product manager, Mr. Eric Gordy, for an answer.
All right, we'll try to get an answer for that. There is a question here that says, is blended learning going to be required by KDE for Kentucky State reporting tracking? And this is what I know. It could change in 5 minutes. It could change in a day. Who knows? What I know on that is that there's no requirement from KDE that you have to do any specific type of blended learning. We provided guidance out to districts, and there's options that they can choose to use. As far as tracking attendance, if the students go to school or they're in the classroom, then the attendance process doesn't change from you. Josh, I think somebody covered that this morning. But if there's participation, what I've heard Robin Kinney tell the superintendents is schools are going to be able to required to track that in Infinite Campus. And Infinite Campus will be used to pull that information on participation, numbers. There will also maybe be evidence that is required beyond just an indicator in Infinite Campus, but I'm sure you'll get more information on that as those specifics are available. But there is the requirement to track participation if you've got students at a virtual environment, but as far as how you do your blended learning, that's not being dictated by by KDE at all. So that was one that I'm sure you weren't going to be the one to answer that.
Nope.
Wish you could. So we got the plan in our district is for there to only be 2 options. A student will either be in attendance at school or participating at home. Does that mean I will need 2 groups, always virtual and always in attendance?
Student will be in attendance. Yes, I think so.
Okay. So do all students in the primary household have to be in the same blended group? For example, if the elementary student is going to be to do in person, but the high school student is going to do virtual. And I think there was another question like that I might have missed before. Thank you for helping me if you put it in there twice.
Yeah, so what will happen is if you use the automated blended learning tool, because of course you can do things manually, but if you use the automated one, it will put students in the same household into the same group. But in a scenario like this, that would have to be done manually, either before, I think is what we would recommend, or if it needed to be done afterwards, you could do it on the individual student attendance tab. So if you use the automated tools, it will do that. It will put same household into the same group.
Okay. So the next question is, do we have to do anything different in the course setup for blended learning? Is the course marked as virtual or performance-based? That's probably more of a KDE question.
Hey, Dee Dee, this is Josh.
Oh, good. Thank you.
No, you're not going to have to do anything different as far as performance-based or virtual.
So there's a household question, and Al, if these aren't yours, and Josh or somebody else jumps in, I'm kind of reading them as I go. So we do not use secondary households, but we do mark students as secondary members. Does the script consider that?
Yes.
Okay, if a district would be pooling a group of virtual students together, then would they be using virtual period scheduling be the best option?
I'm not sure about that. I might have to defer to someone from the training department for like a best practice.
Okay, we'll try to get an answer on that one.
Okay.
What about, can students be part-time, meaning half day virtual and half day in school?
Oh, that's the one that I forgot. I was looking for that question. I don't think that this tool is set up to do that, at least not to my knowledge. I believe it's set up day to day, not period, inside of the period. Our process consultants might have a way to do that, because I'm sure this is not the first time that question has been answered. But in terms of just the functionality for this tool as of 2028, it is only day to day.
Right, and it may get that might be where you get into your virtual tagging at the course level versus the student level.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Let's see. If a student's attendance group is changed mid-semester, will there be a start and end date to show when participation in one group ended and participation in the new group began?
Good question. Yep. So that data is kept. Eric Gordy said that data is kept in the ad hoc tables, which to me, I think it's nothing that you can see through the UI, but you can pull it into an ad hoc report.
Okay. I think I've gotten all the questions for you. If I've missed one, somebody copy and paste it back down there at the bottom again, repost it so I can grab it. We do appreciate you going over this. Sometimes, they say you need to see something new 7 times. Well, I think we've seen it like 3 so far, but all these sessions are recorded. So I want to remind folks that if the right people in your schools or districts haven't been available, campus has resources online that have gone through this, in a little bit more detail, as well as this session will be available. A recording of this session will be available too. So we have another one. Will virtual students need a separate course with virtual performance type, or can we enroll them in a course check for attendance? If they're virtual due to blended learning, I think you can your course setup's going to be like you've normal done. I think it's something what Josh kind of covered before. You wouldn't need to change anything.
Hey, Didi, that is correct. If it's for blended learning, they're just going to lay the blended learning on top of their schedule that they already have.
So can the groups be added in mass, or do we have to mark them on each day?
Nope, they can be added in mass in the same workflow that you build the groups. So in the same workflow that you put the students into the groups, you will also put the groups onto the days tab, if that makes sense. So in the same kind of one fell swoop, you're doing groups, students, and days all at the same time.
Okay. Are the groups built in the days tab within the calendar?
Correct. But you don't have to assign them there. You do the assigning back in the blended learning tool, but you'll be able to see them on the days tab in the calendar.
All right, last call for questions. Anybody's got anything else they want to add to Soapbox? All right, here's another one. To follow up on the end date question, does it end date one date and start the next date in the background?
That I do not know. I don't know how it tracks the time, like the change time.
Right. We'll see if we can get an answer on that one.
Yeah, I don't think Eric already mentioned that. Okay.
We'd rather get you all the right answer than just come up with something that we think might be happening. So we will follow up on the Q&A. Mike Mock's been out there, at least I saw him respond to one of them. So I definitely appreciate all the campus support on this because a lot of stuff going on.